The wind howled like a beast that night, and so did her husband. Outside, the plain stretched wide and merciless, a skin of frost glinting under the moon. Inside the small log house, the fire had burned to embers. The shadows moved like ghosts on the wall, and Clara Boone stood still beside the cradle, holding her breath as her husband's boots scraped the porch. He was drunk again. The door burst open with a kick. Eli Boone, tall and broad with a beard matted from sweat and whiskey, stumbled inside. The cold followed him like a curse. "You think I don't hear it, woman?" he snarled, slamming the door behind him. "That wailing!" He pointed at the baby wrapped in a thin blanket. "Another damn girl." Clara's heart stuttered. She'd prayed for mercy, for silence, for anything but this. "She's just a baby, Eli." He backhanded her before the word finished leaving her mouth. The sound cracked through the cabin like a whip. She hit the table, then the floor, the iron taste of blood filling her mouth. Her eldest daughter, Mary, just 8 years old, screamed. The middle one, Annie, buried her face in the blanket. Only the baby rose, kept crying, small and helpless, unaware of the fury she'd been born into. Eli staggered toward the cradle. "You've cursed me again," he slurred. 3 girls. 3 mouths. What man leaves behind nothing but women? Clara crawled forward, her voice shaking. "Please, she's your child." He lifted his belt. The first strike tore across her shoulder. The second found her cheek. The third missed, snapping against the cradle's leg. The baby wailed louder, the sound piercing through the storm outside. "Stop it, Eli. You'll kill her." Mary cried, rushing to her mother's side. Eli shoved the girl away so hard she hit the wall. Something inside Clara broke. Not her body, her fear. She scrambled up, grabbing the poker from the hearth. "That's enough." Her voice cracked like thunder. Eli froze, eyes bloodshot, surprised by her defiance. Then, with a sneer, he lowered the belt. "You ain't worth the dirt under my boots," he muttered. He stumbled to the corner, dropped into the chair, and within moments began to snore, heavy, uneven, the stench of whiskey thick around him. Clara stood trembling, poker still raised. Her breath came shallow and sharp. Mary's hand found hers, small and shaking. "Mama," the child whispered, "we gonna die here, ain't we?" Clara looked at her 3 girls. Mary with her dark hair and defiant eyes, Annie clinging to her skirt, the baby wriggling weakly in the cradle. The bruises burned on her skin, but a colder pain twisted in her chest. The knowing that if she stayed, one of them might not live to see spring. She set the poker down, took a breath that hurt to swallow, and said quietly, "No, sweetheart, we're leaving. The escape." Before dawn, Clara packed what little she could. A tin of milk, a scrap of bread, her shawl, and the worn Bible her mother had given her before she married. She wrapped the baby close against her chest, whispered for silence, and led the 2 older girls toward the door. Eli snored on. His hand dangled over the chair arm, inches from the rifle propped against the wall. Outside, the wind bit hard enough to draw tears. The ground was frozen, the stars still fading from the night. The mule brayed softly in the barn, uneasy. "Shoo," Clara whispered, stroking its neck. "You're our only hope now." She lifted Annie onto the mule's back, then Mary behind her, with the baby pressed tight under her shawl. She climbed up last. The wood creaked. The sound was deafening in the quiet. Then movement inside the cabin. Eli stirred. Clara froze, heart hammering. A mutter, a cough, then silence again. She nudged the mule forward. Hooves sank into the snow. The house faded into the dark, and the first light of morning painted the plains in blue and gold. The road of frost. The prairie stretched endless before them, empty and cruel. The wind cut through her shawl, slicing her cheeks raw. The baby whimpered now and then, her small face pale as milk. By noon, the mule slowed, its breath steaming. The girls hadn't spoken in hours. Their lips were cracked, eyes sunken. Clara's body ached from holding the baby so tightly. They reached a narrow stream, half frozen. Clara climbed down, broke the ice with a rock, and filled a tin cup. The girls drank greedily, coughing from the cold. "Mama, where are we going?" Mary asked. Clara looked toward the horizon. In truth, She didn't know. Away, she said simply. Somewhere he can't find us. She tried to pray, but the words came out as a whisper no one. Lord, if you ever listened, listen now. Hours passed. The sky grew heavy with snow. The mule stumbled. Clara's fingers were numb, her thoughts slow. She pressed her cheek to the baby's head, felt the faint warmth there, and whispered, Hold on, Rose. Just a little longer. Then she saw it, a dark shape on the ridge ahead. A rider. Her heart stopped. Was it Eli? Had he found them already? The stranger on the ridge. The rider didn't move for a long moment, just sat there on horseback, a black silhouette against the whitening sky. Then, slowly, he descended toward them. Clara gripped the reins tight. Mary, hold Annie. Don't speak. The man drew closer, and the wind carried the jingle of his saddle, the creak of leather. His horse was tall, coal-black, and dusted with frost. He wore a long coat, collar turned up, hat low against the wind. His face was partly hidden by a scarf. When he stopped a few paces away, the silence was thick enough to choke on. You lost. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. Clara hesitated, just passing through. He looked at the children, then the mule. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, lingered on her bruised cheek. Then the baby wrapped in cloth. He didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. Nearest town's 2 days south, he said. You won't make it in this cold. She squared her shoulders. We'll manage. Something flickered in his eyes. Pity or maybe memory. He nodded once, dismounted, and offered a hand. You won't, he said simply. Come on. She stared at his gloved hand, but didn't move. Why should I trust you? He met her gaze for the first time. You shouldn't, he said quietly. But you'll freeze if you don't. The baby whimpered again, soft and weak. That sound decided for her. Clara took his hand. The rancher's refuge. He led them west, toward a line of low hills. The ride was silent except for the wind. The man didn't speak again, not even when Annie coughed or when the mule nearly slipped on the ice. His horse, a steady creature he called Scout, moved with practiced ease. By dusk, the hills opened to a valley, hidden, sheltered from the worst of the wind. There stood a ranch, a large barn, a corral, and a cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. It looked like something out of another world, solid, warm, alive. The man swung off his horse. Get inside, he said, nodding toward the door. There's stew on the stove. She hesitated. This your home? He gave a short nod. Name's Jacob Reed. Clara, she said quietly. Boone. His eyes flicked toward her once more, maybe recognizing the name. You can rest tonight. After that, we'll see. Inside, the cabin smelled with smoke and sage. The fire burned strong. The girls huddled near it, hands stretched toward the warmth. Clara fed the baby, who had started crying again. Jacob moved silently, setting out bowls and bread, without a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You from the Boone place? She froze. You know it? He nodded. Man who lives there, he's trouble. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't meant to show. He's my husband. Jacob said nothing. He just stared into the fire, jaw tight. After a long while, he murmured, You ain't going back there. The night of firelight. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep on a bed of quilts by the hearth, Clara sat alone by the fire. Jacob was outside tending his horse, his shadow moving across the frosted window. The flames painted the room gold, but the corners still felt cold. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the next breath. Still, she couldn't rest. The guilt gnawed at her, leaving, stealing the mule, abandoning everything she'd once called home. But then she looked at her daughters, sleeping peacefully, and she knew she hadn't run away. She'd survived. Jacob came in quietly. He didn't look at her, just hung his hat, poured himself coffee, and sat at the table. The silence stretched. Why'd you help us? She finally asked. He shrugged. Didn't seem right, leaving you out there. You don't even know me. He stared into his cup. Don't need to. Outside, the wind howled again, shaking the shutters. The sound made her flinch, and Jacob noticed. He rose, checked the door latch, and said softly, "Ain't nothing getting in tonight." When he turned back, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Sorrow, maybe, or understanding. Whatever it was, it felt safe. She watched him move to his corner cot, lay down, and pulled a blanket to his chin. Before sleep took him, she heard him speak, not to her, but to his horse tethered outside. "Don't worry, Scout," he murmured. "They ain't staying long." Clara sat there long after his breathing evened. The fire hissed and cracked, painting her face in flickering gold. Safe for now, she told herself. Just for tonight. But in her heart, she knew the truth. The storm behind her wasn't done yet. And somewhere out there, Eli Boone was waking to an empty house. The wind would carry his rage. And soon enough, it would find her. The first light of morning crept through the cracks of Jacob Reed's cabin, spilling gold across the rough-hewn floorboards. For a moment, Clara didn't remember where she was. The warmth, the quiet, the smell of fresh coffee, it all felt foreign, almost sinful after years of fear. Then she saw her daughter sleeping by the hearth, cheeks pink from heat instead of cold. For the first time in years, they looked like children again, outside in axe-split wood, rhythmic, steady. Each strike echoed like a heartbeat against the silence. Clara rose quietly, careful not to wake the baby. She stepped to the window, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Through the glass, she saw Jacob, shirt sleeves rolled, shoulders broad and taut as he swung the axe. The morning sun caught on the scar running from his temple to his jaw, a pale mark of some old violence. He worked without pause, the kind of man who didn't talk to fill silence. He filled it with purpose. When he saw her in the window, he nodded once, then went back to splitting wood. No smile, no words, just that nod. Something about it steadied her. The quiet routine. Jacob had already made breakfast by the time she gathered her courage to step outside. The table held biscuits, beans, and eggs. Simple but warm. "You didn't have to," she began. He cut her off gently, eyes still on his plate. "Kids need food. Don't thank me for that." The girls ate like they hadn't seen food in weeks. Even little Annie, who'd been too scared to speak the night before, smiled when Jacob passed her a cup of milk. Clara watched him from across the table. He ate slow, methodical, as though every motion had purpose. He never asked questions about Eli, never spoke of why she'd run. But she could feel the questions resting behind that silence, heavy and patient. After breakfast, she tried to help wash the dishes, but he shook his head. "Sit. Rest. You look like you ain't stopped in days." "I can work," she said firmly. "I don't want charity." He studied her for a moment, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then he nodded. "Fine. You can feed the hens. Coop's out back." She almost smiled. "That's fair." Days of stillness. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt too good to last. Clara gathered eggs, mended clothes, and taught her daughters to grind corn and brush the horses. Jacob worked the fences and the fields, his quiet presence always near but never intrusive. Sometimes, in the still of late afternoon, she'd glance out the window and see him sitting on the porch with little Rose in his arms, the baby's tiny fingers clutching his beard while he muttered something soft she couldn't hear. Those moments, those gentle, impossible moments, made her chest ache. One evening, while she scrubbed the last of the dishes, he lingered by the door. "You and the girls can stay till the thaw," he said. "Snow's coming soon. Roads will be worse than sin." Clara turned to him. "And after that?" His eyes flickered toward the floorboards. "You'll figure it out." There was no cruelty in his voice, just truth. But truth hurt all the same. The man without words. That night, the storm rolled in, the kind that erased the horizon and swallowed the world whole. Wind howled through the eaves, snow piling against the door. The fire in the hearth roared bright, but the cold pressed close all the same. Jacob sat in his chair, whittling a piece of pine. His knife moved with slow precision. Clara sat across from him, mending Mary's torn sleeve. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, wondering what story hid behind that silence. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "For years now." "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. The knife paused mid-cut. Then he said softly, "Had a wife once, and a boy." The words hung heavy. What became of them? He stared into the fire. She died giving birth. The boy, too. His hand flexed around the knife. House was full of noise once. Laughter, crying. Then it wasn't. So I stopped talking much after that. Didn't see the need. Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." He gave a small shrug. "Ain't something to be sorry for. Just the way life works out sometimes." They sat in silence a long time after that, fire crackling between them. Hen, very quietly, she said, "You're wrong about one thing." He looked up, brow furrowed. "There's always a need for kindness, even if the world don't give it back." Jacob in reply, but his eyes softened. He set the knife aside, leaned back, and let out a slow breath. For the first time, his face eased. Not hard, not guarded, just tired and human. A glimpse of peace. By morning, the storm had buried the valley in white. Clara woke to laughter, her daughter's laughter. She rushed to the window and saw them outside with Jacob, bundled in oversized coats, helping him scatter feed for the horses. He lifted Annie into the saddle, and she squealed with joy as the mare took a slow step forward. Mary watched, eyes wide, then turned to him shyly. "Can I try?" He nodded, one at a time. For a few heartbeats, Clara forgot the bruises on her skin, forgot the nightmares that had chased her here. There was only the sound of her daughter's laughter, the crunch of snow, and the strange peace of watching a man who didn't talk much, but seemed to understand everything. When they came in later, cheeks flushed red, Jacob poured mugs of warm milk for the girls. Clara caught his eye. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted quietly. And this time, she didn't argue. Trouble in town. The next week, Jacob had to ride into town for supplies. Clara offered to go, but he shook his head. "Best you stay put. Don't want anyone to skin questions." He was gone for half a day. When he returned, his expression was different. Harder, the line of his jaw tight. He set down the sacks and said nothing for a while. Finally, she asked, "Something wrong?" He looked at her, really looked, and said, "Your husband's been asking around." The air left her lungs. "He came into the mercantile yesterday," Jacob continued. "Said his wife ran off with his mule and his money. Told folks he aimed to find her." Clara's hands began to shake. "He'll come here," she whispered. Jacob met her eyes, steady and sure. Let him try. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that walls and courage could stand against a man like Eli Boone. But deep down she knew Eli wasn't the kind who let go. That night, Jacob oiled his rifle by the fire. He didn't say a word, but every movement carried meaning. Clara tucked her daughters close under their blankets and watched him in the firelight, the flicker catching the hard lines of his face. He looked like a man made for silence and for war. The firelight confession. The next evening, snow fell again, soft as ashes. The cabin glowed warm against the night. Clara sat by the fire, mending one of Jacob's shirts. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of everything unspoken. Finally, she set the needle down. "Do you think people can change?" she asked. Jacob's gaze stayed on the fire. "Depends on what broke him in the first place." She swallowed hard. "Eli, he wasn't always that way. When we first married, he was kind, gentle. The war took something out of him, I think. Or maybe it just showed what was already there." Her voice cracked. "He said I failed him. 3 girls and no son. Said I curse his name." Jacob's hand tightened on his knee. "Men like that ain't men," he said, low and rough. "They're cowards who blame the world for their own emptiness." Clara looked up, eyes glistening. "You don't understand. I still keep wondering if I could have done more. If maybe I drove him to it." Jacob turned to her then, voice firm as stone. "Don't you ever believe that. You didn't drive him to it. You survived him. There's a difference." The words hit like a strike of lightning, sudden, searing, true. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She tried to hide them, but Jacob reached out, fingers rough and gentle, brushing one away. For a heartbeat, she met his gaze and saw something she hadn't seen in years. warmth, respect, maybe even something deeper. The fire cracked, filling the silence between them. The air felt charged, heavy with words neither dared to say. At last, Jacob pulled his hand back and looked toward the window. "You and them girls got a right to peace," he murmured. "And I mean to make sure you get it." Snow and shadows. The days that followed carried an uneasy stillness. Jacob took to keeping his rifle near the door. He rode the fence lines at dawn and dusk, scanning the horizon for tracks. Clara felt it too, that storm brewing somewhere beyond the hills. Each time the wind shifted, she half expected to see Eli's shape rising out of the white. Still, amid the fear, life carried on. Mary learned to bake bread. Annie sang songs Jacob didn't know she knew. Even baby Rose began to laugh, a sound bright enough to cut through the heaviness. Sometimes Clara caught Jacob watching them, a softness in his expression that didn't match the scars on his face. He didn't smile, but his eyes said what his mouth never did. "You're safe here." Section closing, the calm before the storm. That night, as snow piled higher against the door, Clara lay awake listening to the wind. Jacob sat by the fire, rifle across his knees. "You don't have to stay up," she whispered. He glanced her way. "Can't sleep much anyhow." She hesitated, then said softly, "Jacob, thank you for giving us a home." He looked into the flames, voice low. "Ain't a home till you stop running." Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. The sound carried long and low, fading into the hills. Jacob rose, checked the latch, and peered into the dark. Snow swirled thick beyond the window. For a moment, he thought he saw movement at the edge of the trees, a flicker of shadow against white. His hand went to the rifle. "Get some rest," he said quietly. But as Clara closed her eyes, one thought echoed through her mind, sharp as the wind that battered the walls. The dawn that followed was softer than any Mary had seen in years. The hills outside Samuel's ranch rolled in bands of golden light, the mist lifting slow from the grass. For the first time since she'd been a wife, she didn't flinch at waking. The girls were still asleep, their faces pressed into quilts stitched by Samuel's late mother. Stitched with love, not demand. Mary stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. She could still feel the marks on her body from the life she fled. But inside, something else had started to take root. Quiet, stubborn hope. Samuel's boots sounded behind her. "You sleep at all?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. She shook her head, didn't want to waste a minute of peace. He nodded. Peace is worth guarding. They stood there, neither needing to say more. Outside, the wind pushed through the prairie grass, bending it but never breaking it. Mary knew that feeling well. By midday, she'd begun tending to the chores again, this time by choice, not fear. She milked the cow, hung the washing, helped Samuel patch a section of fencing the storm had torn down. Her daughters played nearby with a litter of barn kittens, their laughter echoing across the yard like bells. When the girls ran to her with dusty hands and bright eyes, Samuel watched them with something she hadn't seen in any man before, gentleness that didn't demand reward. "Tea." He wiped his brow and turned to her. "You know, this ranch needed more than just work. It needed sound again." Mary smiled faintly. "Sound?" He nodded toward the girls. "Laughter. It's been too damn quiet here for too long." That night, the fire crackled again, but this time it wasn't a refuge from fear. It was warmth shared. Samuel sat with a book open, reading by the orange light. Mary sewed torn hems by hand. The girls lay against her, drowsy. When Samuel finally spoke, his words were steady, careful. "You don't owe me anything, Mary. Not your work. Not your staying." She looked up from the needle. "You gave me and my girls a home. That's not something I can just walk away from." He studied her face, the flicker of flame in her eyes, the strength stitched into her posture. "Maybe not a home," he said softly. "Maybe just a place to start again." Mary lowered her gaze, her heart pulling tight. "I don't know how to start again. I've spent years just surviving." "Then start there," he said simply. Survive was the root of every kind of living. Weeks turned to months. The snow came early that year, thick and heavy across the plains. But inside the ranch house, warmth grew like something alive. Mary began to hum when she cooked, her voice low and sure. The girls learned to ride the ponies Samuel trained, giggling when they slipped from the saddle into the soft snow. And Samuel, quiet, steadfast Samuel, seemed to find life in their presence too. He worked harder, smiled more often, even joined them for supper prayers, though his eyes stayed downcast. It was during one such supper, after laughter had settled into a comfortable silence, that he spoke again. "You ever think about the future?" Mary paused with her spoon. "Every day, but not the way I used to." He leaned forward, his eyes catching the firelight. "How's that?" She smiled faintly. "Used to think it was something I had to fear. Now, I think it might be something I can build." Samuel's expression softened. "You already are." But peace on the frontier never lasted long. One gray afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust trailed behind him like a storm. Samuel's hand went straight to the rifle on the porch rail. Mary froze, the old fear crawling up her spine. The rider came closer, and her breath caught. It was Thomas, her husband, alive. He reined his horse hard, eyes burning with that same cruel light she'd once lived under. His face was scarred now, jaw rough with drink and anger. "You think you can hide from me, Mary?" he spat, dismounting with a stumble. "You think you can shame me in front of the whole damn county?" Samuel stepped forward, rifle still in hand but angled down. "You're trespassing, mister." Thomas sneered. "And who the hell are you? Some ranch hand fooling himself into thinking he's a savior." Mary's daughters had run inside, their frightened cries muffled by the door. Mary stood still, trembling, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm not your wife anymore, Thomas." He laughed, cruel and cracked. "You think that matters? You're mine by God and law." Samuel lifted the rifle, just a fraction. "Not anymore, she ain't." Thomas drew his revolver. The sound was a thunderclap in Mary's bones. Everything after that happened fast. Too fast to think. A shout, a shot, the smell of gunpowder and blood. Thomas fell backward into the dirt, clutching his shoulder. His gun clattered away. Samuel stood unmoving, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. Mary's chest heaved, tears burning her eyes. She dropped to her knees beside Thomas. "You brought this on yourself," she whispered. He looked up at her, fury fading into disbelief. "You shot me?" "No," she said quietly. "He did, because you left me no choice but to be protected by another man." Thomas's hand fell away, the life draining from his eyes. Not dead, but broken. He stumbled to his horse and fled, the trail of his shame marking the snow behind him. When the silence returned, Mary turned to Samuel. Her hands were shaking. "You didn't have to do that." He holstered the rifle. "Yes, I did, because he'd have never stopped." She looked at him then, really looked, the lines on his face, the steadiness in his gaze. "You've risked everything for me." He shook his head. "Not everything, just what mattered most." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And what's that?" He hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice rough and honest. "You and them girls." Winter broke at last. The ranch bloomed again in spring's soft touch. The grass grew tall and green. The girls ran barefoot through the fields. Mary worked the soil, planting flowers near the porch. Wild ones, bright and defiant. She caught Samuel watching her one afternoon, his hat tipped low against the sun. "You keep that up, and this place will start looking like paradise," he said. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Maybe paradise is in place. Maybe it's just people who don't give up on you." He met her eyes and didn't look away. "Then I reckon I'm already there." That night, as the stars burned high above the ranch, Mary sat by the fire once more. The girls were asleep. Samuel sat across from her, the silence between them full, but not heavy. She finally spoke. "I used to pray for a sign that life wasn't just punishment, that there was something left worth believing in." He leaned forward, voice soft. "And did you find it?" She nodded slowly, eyes shining in the firelight. "I did. In you. In this place. In the way my girls laugh without fear. Samuel smiled, the first true, unguarded smile she'd ever seen on him. Then maybe it's time you stop surviving, Mary. Start living. She reached across the table, her hand finding his. Rough palm against rough palm. Scar against scar. Proof of the lives they'd both fought to keep. Outside, the wind swept gently over prairie. No longer a thing to fear, but a promise whispered across the open sky. And in that moment, she knew, she had found the heart she never thought she'd have.